In November 1944, a German battalion advancing through the Hurtgen forest came to an inexplicable halt. For 11 hours, over 800 men refused to move forward despite clear orders, open terrain ahead, and no visible enemy resistance. What appeared to be tactical cowardice became one of the most studied incidents of psychological warfare in the European theatre. The truth, buried in declassified after-action reports and the fragmented testimony of survivors, revealed something far more unsettling. A single American sniper had weaponized fear itself. The Hurtgen forest had already consumed thousands of lives by the time the 326th Grenadier Division received orders to secure the eastern ridgeline near the Belgian border. Intelligence suggested minimal American presence, scattered reconnaissance units, possibly a few forward observers. The terrain favored defense, but German command believed momentum and numbers would overwhelm any remaining pockets of resistance. What they encountered instead was silence, broken only by death. Oberleutnant Friedrich Wolf, tasked with leading the vanguard, described the initial advance as routine. His company moved in staggered formation through dense pine and frozen mud, visibility limited to 30 meters in any direction. The forest had been shelled repeatedly, shattered trunks leaned at impossible angles, and the ground was cratered with old wounds. Everything suggested abandonment. Then, at 06:47 hours, the lead scout dropped without sound. No gunshot echoed, no muzzle flash appeared. The man simply collapsed mid-step, a single round through the base of his skull. Wolf's company froze. Protocol dictated suppressive fire and immediate flanking maneuvers, but the absence of auditory signature created paralysis. Where do you return fire when there is no origin point? The men scanned tree lines, listened for bolt action, searched for movement. Nothing. The forest absorbed everything. 14 minutes later, a second soldier fell, this time a machine gunner positioned 40 meters from the first casualty. Again, no report. Again, instant death. The angle of entry suggested elevation, but the canopy was too dense for aerial observation. Wolf ordered his men to ground and sent runners back to battalion command. The message was terse. Advance halted, sniper of unknown position, requesting artillery support. But artillery was already committed elsewhere, and battalion command interpreted the request as excessive caution. The orders returned unchanged. Continue the advance. Wolf complied, though his men moved now with the stiffness of condemned prisoners. They progressed another 100 meters before the third shot found its mark. A radio operator carrying encrypted communications. The bullet destroyed both the man and the equipment. It was then that Wolf understood this was not random marksmanship. This was selection. Over the next 2 hours, 6 more soldiers died. Each was a specialist. Another radio operator, 2 NCOs, a medic wearing a Red Cross armband, an officer consulting a map, a forward observer with binoculars. The pattern became undeniable. Whoever was firing possessed not only extraordinary skill, but also tactical intelligence. They were dismantling the battalion's operational capacity, one careful shot at a time. And they were doing it from a position no one could identify. Panic began to metastasize through the ranks. Soldiers refused to stand. Officers screamed orders that went unheeded. The battalion, designed for overwhelming force, had become a huddled mass of 800 men, afraid to move 50 meters. Wolf attempted to organize a search grid, but volunteers were non-existent. To leave cover was to accept execution. The sniper had transformed an entire military unit into prey. By noon, the 326th Grenadier Division had achieved no forward progress. Reconnaissance planes reported the German position as static, inexplicably bunched in a forest clearing with no defensive works. American artillery, once it arrived, would annihilate them. Yet the alternative, advancing under the unseen marksman, seemed equally fatal. Wolf sent another message to command, this one more desperate: cannot proceed. Unknown sniper eliminating leadership, morale collapsing. Require immediate relief or withdrawal authorization. The response came 3 hours later, written by a colonel who had never seen the Hurtgen forest. Cowardice will not be tolerated. Resume advance or face court-martial. Wolf crumpled the paper in his fist. He looked at his men. Boys, most of them shivering in frozen mud, eyes darting at every creak of timber. He knew what the order demanded. He also knew it was suicide. As dusk approached, the forest began to darken into impenetrable shadow. The sniper had not fired in over an hour. Some soldiers whispered that perhaps the American had withdrawn. Others believed he was simply waiting. Wolf made the decision that would later define his testimony at the inquiry. He ordered his men to hold position through the night. No advance, no retreat, just survival. War demands courage, he would later say to investigators, but courage requires hope. That forest had stolen ours. The sniper's 11th victim had been killed at 14:23 hours. After that, only silence remained, thick, oppressive, and more terrifying than any artillery barrage. Somewhere in the trees, a single man had stopped a battalion, and no one knew if he was still watching. Morning brought no relief. The German battalion remained paralyzed in the same defensive crouch, spread across 200 meters of frozen ground like a wound that refused to close. Oberleutnant Wolf spent the night rotating sentries and discouraging desertion attempts. 3 men had tried to flee westward under cover of darkness, and all 3 had been found at dawn with single bullet wounds. The sniper, it seemed, enforced a perimeter as absolute as barbed wire. Battalion command sent a liaison officer at first light, a captain named Erdmann, who arrived with contempt in his posture and disbelief in his voice. He accused Wolf of fabricating the threat to excuse cowardice. "One sniper cannot stop 800 men," Erdmann declared, standing fully upright in the clearing. "This is psychological contagion, not tactical reality." Wolf warned him to crouch. Erdmann laughed. At 07:14 hours, a bullet removed the left side of Erdmann's jaw, and he collapsed into the mud, choking on bone fragments and disbelief. The shot originated from a different angle than the previous 11. The sniper had moved during the night, or perhaps there had always been multiple positions prepared. Wolf's men dragged Erdmann's convulsing body behind a fallen log, where a medic worked frantically with gauze and morphine. The captain would survive, but he would never speak clearly again. His final written report, delivered weeks later from a hospital bed, contained a single revised sentence. The threat was credible. The soldiers of the 326th had begun to personify their tormentor. Some called him Der Geist, the ghost. Others used Der Richter, the judge, because he seemed to evaluate worth before pulling the trigger. A few insisted he was not human at all, but a manifestation of the forest's refusal to yield. These were not superstitions born of ignorance. They were coping mechanisms constructed by rational minds subjected to irrational terror. When death is invisible, the mind assigns it shape. Wolf attempted to organize a counter-sniper operation. He identified 3 soldiers with hunting experience and equipped them with scoped rifles salvaged from fallen officers. Their mission was simple: locate the American through elimination of possible hides. The tallest trees, the densest thickets, the elevated ridgelines, anywhere offering sightlines and concealment. The 3 hunters moved out at 09:30 hours, spaced 20 meters apart, scanning methodically. The first hunter died at 09:47, the second at 10:03, the third at 10:19. Each had been shot through the chest while aiming upward, suggesting the sniper had baited them into exposing themselves by searching elevated positions while he fired from ground level. It was tactical deception of a sophistication that suggested formal training, likely a graduate of specialized reconnaissance schools or perhaps one of the experimental sharpshooter programs the Americans had deployed in the Pacific Theater. By midday, the psychological toll had become physiological. Soldiers vomited from stress. Others wept openly. A young corporal began laughing uncontrollably until his squadmates restrained him. Wolfe himself felt the edges of his perception blurring. Every shadow suggested movement, every sound implied proximity. He had commanded men through artillery bombardments and urban combat, but this was different. Artillery was indiscriminate, this was personal. The battalion's supply situation worsened. No resupply column would approach the area after word spread of the sniper. Water was rationed. Ammunition, ironically abundant, remained unused. The men sat surrounded by firepower they could not employ because they had no target. It was a perfect inversion of military logic, maximum armament paired with total impotence. At 13:45 hours, an American reconnaissance plane passed overhead, a P-51 Mustang flying lazy circles above the tree line. Wolfe's men did not fire. They knew the pilot would report their position, and they no longer cared. American artillery would at least be visible. The anticipation of shelling was preferable to the uncertainty of the sniper. At least explosions could be heard before they killed you. But the artillery never came. Instead, at 15:20, a single rifle shot killed the battalion's senior medical officer as he tended to Erdmann's wound. The doctor had been kneeling behind triple-layered cover, obscured by logs and a canvas tarp. The bullet had threaded through a gap no wider than 15 centimeters, traveled 40 meters, and struck with enough precision to sever the spinal cord. It was an impossible shot, or would have been for anyone less patient. Now te invito a deixar nos comentários de onde você está nos assistindo e o horário exato em que escuta esta história. Nos interessa saber até quais lugares e em quais momentos do dia ou da noite chegam estes relatos documentados. Wolfe realized then what they were facing, not merely a skilled marksman, but an architect of fear. The sniper was not trying to kill 800 men, he was trying to break them. Every shot was a calculated psychological incision designed to sever the battalion's cohesion more effectively than bullets ever could. And it was working. As the second night descended, Wolfe made a decision that would later appear in both German and American military academies as a case study in asymmetric warfare response. He ordered his men to dig, not defensive trenches, but graves. "If we cannot move forward," he told them quietly, "we prepare to stay." The soldiers understood. They were no longer an advancing force. They were a besieged population. Somewhere beyond the perimeter of their fear, a single American remained invisible. The forest swallowed every clue to his location, and with each passing hour, the distance between hunter and hunted collapsed into something closer to worship. "We did not hate him," one soldier would later confess during Allied interrogation. "We feared him." And fear, when profound enough, becomes indistinguishable from respect. The third day began with fog so dense it obscured visibility beyond 10 meters. Oberleutnant Wolfe permitted himself a moment of cautious hope. Perhaps the weather would provide cover enough for withdrawal. But hope in the Hurtgen forest had become a luxury reserved for those who had not yet learned the sniper's patterns. By 08:15 hours, that lesson resumed. A soldier named Holzer, attempting to relieve himself at the edge of the perimeter, was shot through the kidney. The fog had not hindered the marksman at all. If anything, it seemed to amplify his advantage. Holzer's screams lasted 14 minutes before shock silenced him. No one moved to retrieve his body. The sniper had established a new rule. The perimeter was not merely contained, it was shrinking. Wolfe consulted the few surviving officers in a hasty conference behind a disabled half-track. The consensus was grim. Remaining stationary meant slow attrition through sniper fire, exposure, and eventual starvation. Advancing meant immediate casualties among those who moved first. Retreating would require coordination the battalion no longer possessed. Panic would transform withdrawal into rout, and a routed army in open ground was a slaughterhouse. They were trapped not by terrain, but by mathematics. Captain Brandt, a logistics officer who had survived thus far by remaining prone for 30 hours straight, proposed a desperate alternative. What if we offer surrender? The suggestion was met with silence. German doctrine did not accommodate capitulation to a single enemy combatant, and the shame of such an act would follow any survivor through courts-martial and history both. Yet Brandt's logic was undeniable. If one American can stop 800 Germans, perhaps he has earned the right to dictate terms. Wolfe dismissed the idea, though not immediately. The fact that it had been spoken aloud indicated how thoroughly their tactical framework had collapsed. Soldiers were trained to assess enemy strength in terms of numbers, weapons, positions. They were not trained to calculate the combat effectiveness of solitude paired with patience. The sniper had introduced a variable for which German military doctrine had no coefficient. At 11 hours, two things happened simultaneously. First, the fog lifted, revealing the surrounding forest in cold November light. Second, the sniper fired 3 shots in rapid succession, each killing a soldier who had stood upright the moment visibility improved. The message was unmistakable. Weather was irrelevant. The marksman's awareness extended beyond sight. Wolfe began to suspect something that would later be confirmed through American records. The sniper possessed a forward observer. Somewhere nearby, another American, possibly equipped with field glasses and a radio, was directing fire. It would explain the impossible angles, the kills through concealment, the selections of high-value targets. A sniper could achieve precision. A sniper with intelligence support could achieve omniscience, but German radio intercept units detected no transmissions. Reconnaissance patrols, those few brave or foolish enough to venture beyond the perimeter, found no evidence of American positions within 2 kilometers. The sniper appeared to operate in complete isolation, which meant either he possessed preternatural situational awareness or the battalion's understanding of the battlefield was fundamentally flawed. A young lieutenant named Steiner, trained in Soviet front tactics, offered an alternative theory. What if he is not alone? Steiner proposed. What if there are multiple snipers, each firing sparingly, creating the illusion of a single ghost? It was tactically sound. Coordinated sniper teams could cover overlapping fields of fire while maintaining the psychological impact of singularity. The enemy would waste resources hunting one man while 6 operated freely. Wolfe tested the theory by ordering simultaneous movements in 3 directions, north, south, and east, each by a small squad moving in short bursts. If multiple snipers existed, the response would be dispersed. At 13:30, the squads moved. 7 seconds later, the northern squad's leader was killed. 18 seconds after that, the southern squad's pointman fell. At 34 seconds, the eastern squad's medic collapsed. 3 shots, 3 different angles, 3 dead men. And between each shot, a precise interval, just long enough for a single marksman to acquire, aim, and fire. 1 sniper, 1 rifle, 1 man enforcing absolute dominance over 800. The afternoon brought a new torment: thirst. The battalion's water supplies had dwindled to critical levels, and the nearest stream lay 60 meters beyond the perimeter. Wolfe authorized a water collection team of 4 men, chosen by lottery because volunteering had become synonymous with suicide. They moved in a tight cluster, carrying canteens and a collapsible bucket, bodies low, eyes scanning. They reached the stream, they filled the containers, they began the return journey. At 40 meters from safety, the lead man was shot through the throat. The others abandoned the water and sprinted. 2 made it back, 1 did not. The canteens remained where they had fallen, just beyond reach, full of water the battalion would never drink. That evening, Wolfe made an entry in his field journal that would later be quoted in tactical analyses across 3 continents. "We are not fighting a sniper. We are fighting the idea of the sniper. He has become the forest, and the forest has become him. To defeat him, we would need to destroy every tree, every shadow, every possibility. We lack the ammunition for that, and we lack the will. If that história te surpreendeu, já deixa o like para ajudar o canal. As darkness returned, the men of the 326th dug deeper into the frozen earth. Not graves now, but burrows. They burrowed like animals, seeking the safety of earth over air. Wolf permitted it. Doctrine no longer mattered. Survival had become the only objective, and survival meant making oneself small, silent, and beneath notice. The sniper did not fire that night, but his silence was more effective than his bullets. In the absence of death, the soldiers imagined it everywhere. Every crack of ice became a gunshot. Every shift of wind became footsteps. The mind, when denied certainty, manufactures terror to fill the void. Somewhere in the darkness, a single American kept watch. And in the trenches, 800 Germans waited for a dawn they were no longer certain would come. On the fourth morning, the 326th Grenadier Division received new orders via runner. Forward observers, report your position unchanged for 72 hours. Explain tactical justification or prepare for relief and inquiry. The message arrived written on standard Wehrmacht communication paper, stamped with divisional insignia, signed by a general who had never heard a bullet pass close enough to disturb air. Wolf read it twice, then used it to light a cigarette he no longer had tobacco for. The paper burned, the order remained. Battalion strength now stood at 731 effectives, 69 casualties across 3 days, not from artillery, not from armor, not from massed infantry assault, but from a single rifle wielded with monastic discipline. The wounded had been consolidated into a makeshift aid station behind the disabled half-track, where 2 remaining medics worked without morphine, without sulfur powder, without hope. Gangrene had begun its slow claim on 3 men. Infection festered in 11 others. The sniper's bullets had been clean, the forest's aftermath was not. Wolf convened what remained of his command staff at 0730 hours. 5 officers sat in a circle, hunched below sight lines, speaking in whispers as though volume itself might draw fire. The discussion was brief. Captain Brandt repeated his surrender proposal. Lieutenant Steiner suggested a night withdrawal, gambling that darkness would obscure movement. Lieutenant Voss, an artillery liaison with no artillery to coordinate, advocated for calling in air support. Perhaps Luftwaffe ground attack aircraft could strafe the suspected sniper positions with enough saturation to eliminate the threat. Wolf rejected all 3. Surrender remained unconscionable. Night withdrawal had already proven fatal. The 3 deserters had been killed in complete darkness, suggesting the American possessed night optics or had memorized the terrain thoroughly enough to fire blind. And Luftwaffe support, even if approved, would require radio contact using frequencies the sniper seemed to monitor. The previous day's attempt to call for air reconnaissance had resulted in the radio operator's death mid-transmission. "We have one option remaining," Wolf said quietly. "We wait for him to make a mistake." It was not a plan, it was resignation dressed in tactical language, but the officers nodded because nodding required no movement above the shoulders. They dispersed to their squads, each carrying the same message: conserve ammunition, ration water, remain prone. The 326th Grenadier Division, designed for offensive operations, had become a monument to stillness. At 0914 hours, the sniper resumed fire. A sergeant named Koch, responsible for maintaining squad cohesion in the eastern sector, was shot through the upper chest while adjusting his field pack. The angle of entry suggested the sniper had moved again. Southeast now, perhaps 200 meters distant, possibly elevated. Wolf marked the estimated position on his map with a small cross. 17 crosses now dotted the page, each representing a firing position, no pattern evident, no predictive value. The battalion's morale had degraded beyond measurement. Soldiers no longer spoke. Some had stopped eating, not from lack of rations, but from apathy. Others had begun to exhibit symptoms that field manuals categorized as combat fatigue, but which Wolf recognized as something deeper: the dissolution of identity. When a man can no longer distinguish himself from a target, when his entire existence reduces to the question of whether the next second contains a bullet, he ceases to function as a soldier. He becomes a statistical probability waiting for resolution. By noon, a new phenomenon emerged. 3 soldiers, separately without coordination, stood upright and began walking toward the forest edge. They did not run, they did not shout, they simply walked, arms at their sides, eyes forward, pace steady. It resembled sleepwalking more than desertion. The sniper killed the first at 30 meters, the second at 45, the third made it 60 meters before the bullet found him. All 3 had been shot through the heart, quick deaths, almost merciful compared to gut wounds or shattered limbs. Wolf understood what he had witnessed. The sniper was providing an exit. For men who could no longer endure the waiting, who preferred certainty over suspense, the American offered a clean death. It was a perverse form of mercy, and it was devastatingly effective. By granting the desperate a quick end, the sniper reinforced the paralyzing fear in everyone else. Those who remained now knew they had chosen to stay, and that choice made their terror consensual. Afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, a chaplain named Father Dietrich, attached to divisional headquarters, who had walked through 3 kilometers of contested forest to reach the battalion. He arrived unharmed, rosary in hand, face pale but composed. Wolf met him behind the half-track. "Why are you here?" Wolf asked. "Your men requested last rites," Father Dietrich replied. "The request came through official channels. We are not dead yet." "No," the chaplain agreed, "but you are no longer living." Father Dietrich moved among the soldiers, offering prayers and communion wafers salvaged from his pack. The men received both with hollow gratitude. Wolf observed the scene and felt something close to envy. The chaplain had faith to sustain him, while the soldiers had only each other, and that was proving insufficient. At 15:40 hours, the sniper fired again. Father Dietrich, kneeling beside a wounded corporal, was shot through the right shoulder. The bullet passed cleanly, missing bone and artery, a wound survivable with proper treatment, but the message was unmistakable. Even clergy were not exempt. The American made no distinction between combatants and those who tended them. Everyone within the perimeter existed at his discretion. Wolf dressed the chaplain's wound, while the man murmured prayers in Latin. "Do you think God watches this?" Wolf asked, surprising himself with the question. Father Dietrich looked at him with eyes that had seen too many field hospitals. "I think God watches everything. Whether he intervenes is a different matter. Then he watches that American too." "Yes, and does nothing." "Perhaps," the chaplain said softly. "The American is the intervention." As dusk approached, Wolf made a decision he had been delaying for 3 days. He wrote a dispatch to divisional command, this time bypassing official protocol. The message was addressed not to his superior officer, but to military intelligence. Request any available information on American sniper doctrine, training programs, and known operatives in sector. Current engagement suggests adversary of exceptional capability. Need tactical profile to formulate response. The runner departed at twilight, moving fast and low. Wolf watched him vanish into the trees and wondered if the message would ever arrive. He wondered, too, what answer could possibly help. Even if intelligence provided a name, a history, a photograph, what could they do with it? The sniper's identity mattered less than his existence. You cannot negotiate with a shadow. You cannot reason with silence. That night, the temperature dropped below freezing. Men huddled together for warmth, creating clusters that made them easier targets come morning. Wolf did not order them to separate. The brief comfort of shared body heat seemed a fair trade for increased vulnerability. They were all going to die here anyway, if not from bullets, then from cold, hunger, or despair. The forest settled into its nocturnal rhythms. Wind through broken branches, the distant call of an owl, the creak of freezing sap. And somewhere within that darkness, a single American prepared for the fifth day. Dawn on the fifth day revealed a landscape transformed by frost. Every surface gleamed with ice, and the soldiers of the 326th woke to find their uniforms stiffened, their weapons coated in rime. Breathing produced visible clouds that lingered in the still air, flags of vulnerability marking each man's position. Wolf ordered absolute silence. Even exhalation had become a tactical liability. The sniper's first shot came at 06:52 hours, killing a lance corporal who had shifted position to relieve a cramp. The sound of the rifle, distant, flat, swallowed quickly by the forest, had become almost familiar. Some soldiers no longer flinched at the report. Habituation to terror is its own form of death. By mid-morning, the battalion's situation had deteriorated beyond tactical categories into something approaching existential crisis. Food supplies were exhausted, except for hardtack and frozen turnips salvaged from abandoned supply caches. Water had been reduced to melted ice collected in helmets, shared mouth to mouth when containers froze solid. 17 men exhibited symptoms of trench foot, despite never having occupied trenches. 5 showed signs of frostbite on fingers and ears. The forest was not merely a battlefield, it was a mechanism of slow erasure. At 10:20 hours, a motorcycle courier arrived from divisional headquarters, somehow navigating the forest paths without encountering the sniper. He delivered a sealed envelope to Wolf, saluted, and departed without speaking. The envelope contained 2 items: a decoded intelligence summary and a handwritten note from the division commander. The intelligence summary was brief. American sniper doctrine emphasizes autonomy, patience, and target selection hierarchy. Trainees undergo psychological screening for emotional detachment and extended solitude tolerance. Primary objective: disruption of enemy command and control through elimination of leadership and specialist personnel. Known practice: economy of fire. Minimal shots for maximum psychological impact. Counter-sniper protocols recommend saturation artillery, smoke deployment, or tactical withdrawal. Direct engagement not advised. The handwritten note was briefer. Friedrich, withdrawal authorization denied. Higher command views your situation as containment success. American resources committed to your sector cannot be deployed elsewhere. You are fulfilling strategic function through inaction. Hold position until relieved or situation resolves. Regret circumstances. Signed, General Major Kessler. Wolf read both documents twice, then folded them carefully and placed them in his breast pocket. The intelligence summary confirmed what he had already deduced through blood and observation. The handwritten note confirmed something worse. They had become bait. The 326th was no longer an assault battalion. It was a strategic anchor, pinning American attention while other operations unfolded elsewhere. They were expendable, and their suffering had been reclassified as utility. He gathered his surviving officers and shared the contents without editorial. Captain Brandt began laughing, a high, brittle sound that spiraled toward hysteria before Steiner slapped him silent. Lieutenant Voss stared at the frozen ground and said nothing. Father Dietrich, still present despite his wound, made the sign of the cross and whispered something in Latin that Wolf suspected was not a prayer of comfort. "We hold," Wolf announced, "not because we choose to, but because choice has been removed. Inform the men." But the men already knew. Information in a static battlefield travels through osmosis, whispers, glances, the quality of silence between orders. By noon, every soldier understood their role. They were not warriors but monuments, living gravestones marking the perimeter of American fear. At 13:15 hours, something unexpected occurred. The sniper fired 4 shots in rapid succession, a departure from his measured, calculated pattern. All 4 missed. One struck a tree trunk 2 meters left of a radio operator. Another kicked up frozen mud 3 meters short of a machine gunner. The third passed overhead with a whistle audible even at distance. The fourth seemed not to have been aimed at anyone, terminating somewhere in the forest canopy. The battalion reacted with confusion rather than relief. Wolf felt his pulse quicken, not from fear, but from recognition. The sniper was either exhausted, low on ammunition, or deliberately communicating. 4 missed shots from a marksman who had not missed once in 4 days was not error. It was message. Steiner proposed a theory. He is running low on ammunition and attempting to conserve rounds by firing warning shots instead of kill shots. Brandt countered, or he wants us to think he is weakening, drawing us into movement, so he can resume killing when we expose ourselves. Wolf considered both interpretations and arrived at a third. He is telling us he could have killed 4 men just now, and chose not to. He is demonstrating restraint. It is psychological warfare, reminder that he controls when we die. At 14 hours, a soldier named Becker, emboldened or deranged by the missed shots, stood upright and began walking toward the forest edge. His squad mates shouted for him to stop. Becker ignored them. He walked 30 meters, 40, 50. At 60 meters, he turned and faced the battalion, spread his arms wide and screamed, "Shoot me! I am here! Shoot me!" The sniper did not fire. Becker stood there for 11 minutes, arms spread, shouting profanities in German, challenging the invisible American to end him. Nothing happened. Eventually, exhausted or disappointed, Becker collapsed to his knees and began weeping. 2 soldiers crawled out to retrieve him, dragging him back to the perimeter while he sobbed incoherently. Wolf added this incident to his field journal. The sniper grants mercy when it serves to amplify fear. By allowing Becker to live, he demonstrates that death is not inevitable, only probable. This uncertainty is more corrosive than certainty. We do not know when we will die, or why some are chosen and others spared. The randomness is the weapon. As afternoon faded toward evening, Father Dietrich approached Wolf with a theological question. "Do you think the American believes he is righteous?" Wolf considered the question. "I think he believes he is effective." "That is not the same thing." "No," Wolf agreed, "but in war, effectiveness is the only righteousness that matters." The chaplain nodded slowly. "Then we are all damned, the killer and the killed alike." That night, the battalion did not sleep. Exhaustion had pushed them beyond the body's capacity for rest into a state of waking paralysis. Men sat with open eyes, seeing nothing, thinking nothing, waiting for nothing. They had become ghosts inhabiting their own corpses, and the forest was their purgatory. Wolf made a final entry in his journal before dawn. "On the 5th day, I realized the American has already won. He does not need to kill us all. He only needs to keep us here until the forest finishes what he began. In this he has shown wisdom. The forest is patient, the forest is inevitable, and we are fuel for its slow fire." Somewhere in the darkness, the sniper kept watch, and in the frozen earth, 800 ghosts waited for permission to finish dying. The 6th morning arrived without sun. Cloud cover pressed low over the Hurtgen forest, reducing the world to gradations of grey. Visibility extended perhaps 20 meters, enough to see the next soldier, not enough to see death approaching. Wolf permitted himself no illusions about the weather's protection. If anything, the obscured sight lines would amplify the sniper's advantage. Uncertainty was his ally. At 07:03 hours, the first shot of the day killed Lieutenant Voss while he urinated behind a fallen log. The artillery liaison had survived 5 days by remaining horizontal. Standing cost him everything. The bullet entered through the lower spine and exited through the abdomen, and Voss took 47 minutes to die, whimpering for his mother while Father Dietrich held his hand and lied about heaven. The death marked a psychological threshold. Voss had been cautious to the point of paranoia. He had not stood fully upright since the siege began, had eaten lying down, had defecated without rising. If absolute caution could not preserve life, then caution was meaningless. This realization spread through the battalion like contagion. By mid-morning, 3 more soldiers had simply stood and walked away. The sniper killed 2. The third vanished into the forest and was never recovered. Wolf called the remaining officers, now reduced to Steiner and Brandt, to a final conference. They met in a depression where the disabled half-track provided marginal cover, though all 3 understood cover was illusory. The sniper had demonstrated he could penetrate any barrier given patience and geometry. "We have 2 options," Wolf began without preamble. "We can remain here and die slowly, or we can attempt breakthrough and die quickly. I am seeking consensus." Steiner spoke first. "Breakthrough means casualties of 60% minimum. Those who survive will be scattered, disorganized, vulnerable to pursuit. We would arrive at friendly lines as fragments, not as a unit." Brandt added, "Remaining means complete loss. Food is gone, water is scarce, morale is non-existent. In 3 days, we will be too weak to defend ourselves even if the American withdraws." "Then breakthrough," Wolf concluded. "At dusk. We move in 3 waves. First wave draws fire and absorbs casualties. Second wave exploits the distraction. Third wave provides rear guard. I will lead the first wave." Both officers stared at him. Leading the first wave was suicide, and all 3 knew it. But Wolf's logic was sound. If the commander died first, the remaining men would understand that sacrifice was universal. Leadership, in the end, was demonstrated through the willingness to become an example. They spent the afternoon preparing. Ammunition was redistributed. The wounded were informed they would be left behind with medical supplies and a white flag improvised from a torn undershirt. Father Dietrich volunteered to remain with them. Wolf tried to dissuade him, but the chaplain's logic was immovable. "I came to offer last rites. That obligation persists." At 16:30 hours, a strange thing occurred. The clouds parted briefly, allowing a single shaft of sunlight to illuminate the forest floor. In that moment of clarity, Wolf saw something he had not seen in 6 days. The forest was beautiful. The ice crystals on pine needles refracted light into small rainbows. The frozen moss glowed emerald. The shattered trees, broken and leaning, possessed a ruined grandeur. He understood then that the forest was indifferent to their suffering. It would outlast them, reclaim their bodies, erase every trace of this futile siege. The thought brought him comfort. At 17:45, as dusk descended, Wolf assembled the first wave. 43 men, himself included. He gave no speech. Words had lost meaning days ago. Instead, he simply gestured forward, and the men began to move. They advanced in a loose skirmish line, spacing 5 meters apart, moving at a controlled run. The plan was to cover 200 meters before the sniper could kill more than 10. 200 meters would bring them to a ridgeline offering defilade and a chance to regroup. 200 meters was an achievable distance. 200 meters was survival. At 50 meters, the first man fell. At 70 meters, the second. At 90 meters, 3 men died within 2 seconds of each other. The sniper had fired, reacquired, fired again with mechanical efficiency. Wolf kept running. His lungs burned, his legs felt distant. He heard the rifle's flat crack and did not know if the bullet was meant for him. At 120 meters, he dove behind a boulder and took count. 21 men remained from the first wave, half casualties in 2 minutes. The math was unsustainable, but the second wave had begun its advance and the sniper's attention divided. Wolf saw soldiers sprint past him, heard the rifle crack 4 more times, saw 2 men collapse mid-stride. He pressed forward, 150 meters. The ridgeline visible now, a dark outline against darkening sky. Men were screaming, whether from fear or defiance he could not distinguish. Beside him, a corporal named Richter was hit in the leg and continued crawling. dragging the shattered limb behind him until a second bullet ended his effort. At 170 meters, Wolf realized something impossible. The rate of fire had not decreased. The sniper was engaging multiple targets across dispersed positions without pause, which meant either supernatural speed or... The realization arrived with the clarity of inevitability. There were two snipers. Perhaps there always had been. Perhaps the Americans had deployed a team from the beginning, coordinating fire to create the illusion of a single ghost. Or perhaps the second sniper had arrived recently, reinforcing the siege when the first ran low on ammunition. Either way, the tactical equation had changed. Two marksmen with overlapping fields of fire could kill indefinitely. Wolf reached the ridgeline with 11 men. The second wave brought 16 more. The third wave, designed as rear guard, never arrived. The sniper team had focused their fire on the trailing soldiers, annihilating them completely. Of 800 men who had entered the Hurtgen forest 6 days prior, 27 now huddled behind a frozen ridgeline, gasping for air, checking their bodies for wounds they had not yet felt. Steiner appeared beside Wolf, bleeding from a gash across his scalp, but functional. "We made it," he gasped. "Some of us made it," Wolf corrected. They rested for 17 minutes, enough time for heartbeats to slow, enough time to realize they were still being watched. The snipers had not pursued, but Wolf felt their attention like pressure against his skull. Somewhere behind them, two Americans observed through scopes, calculating angles, waiting for the next mistake. At 18:47 hours, Wolf gave the order to continue. They moved along the ridgeline, using terrain features for cover, advancing in short bounds. The snipers fired sporadically, one shot every 3 minutes, each killing a man who had been judged expendable or careless. By the time full darkness arrived, the group numbered 19. They reached friendly lines at 21:30 hours. An American patrol, surprised to encounter German soldiers approaching with hands raised, nearly fired before recognizing the universal posture of defeat. Wolf surrendered his sidearm to a lieutenant who looked barely old enough to shave. The lieutenant accepted the weapon without comment and gestured for the Germans to sit. Wolf sat. Around him, his men sat. They had survived. They had escaped. And yet, as medics approached with blankets and water, Wolf felt no relief, only the persistent certainty that the snipers were still watching, still waiting, somewhere in the darkness behind them. "How many were you?" the American lieutenant asked in heavily accented German. 800, Wolf replied. The lieutenant looked at the 19 exhausted men and said nothing. Numbers told the story more effectively than words ever could. The interrogation room at Allied Forward Headquarters was small, warm, and brightly lit, a stark contrast to 6 days in frozen darkness. Oberleutnant Friedrich Wolf sat across from a captain named Brennan, who spoke fluent German and had the detached courtesy of an academic conducting research rather than an interrogation. A stenographer recorded everything in shorthand. Coffee steamed in chipped ceramic mugs. Outside, the war continued without pause. "Tell me about the sniper," Brennan said. Wolf had been asked this question 17 times in the 48 hours since his surrender. Each time, he had provided technical details, estimated ranges, angles of fire, target selection patterns, ammunition expenditure calculations. Each time, the interrogators had nodded politely and asked again. They wanted something beyond tactics. They wanted understanding. "He was patient," Wolf began, choosing his words carefully. "More patient than any soldier I have encountered. He did not fire to kill. He fired to teach. Every shot was a lesson in our powerlessness, and we learned." Brennan made a note. "You believe there were 2 snipers." "I know there were 2. The rate of fire during our breakout attempt exceeded single-operator capacity. Either 2 snipers working in coordination or 1 sniper with an observer who occasionally took shots. Either way, partnership." "Did you ever see them?" "No." "Hear them? Any evidence of their position?" "Nothing actionable. They moved continuously, fired from multiple hides, left no trace. Professional work, exceptional work." Wolf paused. I presume you know who they were. Ah, that is why you ask me these questions. You want to know if I discovered something your records do not show. Brennan smiled faintly. Our records show a reconnaissance team, 2 men, operating in that sector during your battalion's advance. Both are alive. Both have declined to provide detailed accounts, citing operational security. What they accomplished is documented. 1 German battalion neutralized without significant friendly casualties, strategic delay imposed on enemy advance, minimal ammunition expenditure. From a tactical perspective, it was a perfect operation. Perfect, Wolf repeated. The word felt obscene. 781 men are dead or missing. That is your perfection. As your battalion was advancing to reinforce positions that would have cost thousands of American lives to dislodge, Brennan said evenly, 2 men prevented that. The arithmetic is not complex, Oberleutnant. Wolf looked at his coffee, now cold. May I ask a question? Of course. The snipers, did they volunteer for this, or were they ordered? Brennan considered the question. I do not know. Does it matter? It matters, Wolf said quietly, because I need to know if they understood what they were doing to us, if they felt anything. Brennan closed his notebook. One of them, the primary marksman, was a hunter from Montana. Before the war, he guided elk hunting expeditions in the Rockies. The other was a schoolteacher from Vermont who learned to shoot competing in regional marksmanship competitions. Neither had killed anyone before Europe. Both are expected to return home when this ends. He paused. Does that answer satisfy you? No, Wolf admitted, but nothing would. Over the following weeks, as Allied intelligence compiled after-action reports, fragments of the truth emerged through survivor testimonies and recovered documents. The 2 American snipers, identified in declassified records only as Corporal J. Mackenzie and Private First Class T. Hartley, had been inserted 3 days before the German advance, tasked with reconnaissance and harassment. They carried 47 rounds between them. They fired 43. Mackenzie's field report, typed on a portable typewriter in a tent near Aachen, contained no flourishes. Mission objective achieved. Enemy battalion contained for 6 days through selective engagement and psychological pressure. 0 friendly casualties. Recommend doctrine revision. Single sniper team with adequate positioning can neutralize force 400x their size through fear amplification rather than attrition. Ammunition conservation essential. Patient selection of leadership targets creates cascading morale collapse. Environment was ally. Forest density prevented enemy maneuver. Cold reduced effectiveness of survivors. Withdrew when enemy attempted breakout. Pursuit deemed tactically unnecessary as remaining force posed negligible threat. A Private Hartley's account was shorter, handwritten in a personal journal, never intended for official review. We stopped them. I don't know how to feel about that. Mac says we saved American lives, and he's right. But I keep thinking about the ones who just stood up and walked toward us. They weren't attacking. They were surrendering to death because waiting was worse. I shot 3 of them. Clean shots. Through the heart, like Mac taught me. Mercy, he called it. I don't know if that's what it was. I don't know if I'll ever know. The 326th Grenadier Division was officially struck from Wehrmacht rolls in December 1944, its losses attributed to combat operations in the Hürtgen sector. No mention was made of the siege, the snipers, or the manner of death. Military bureaucracy prefers clean numbers to messy truths. 781 casualties became a statistic. 19 survivors became footnotes. Oberleutnant Wolf spent the remainder of the war in a prisoner camp near Liverpool, where he taught other German officers about asymmetric warfare based on his experience in the forest. His lectures were transcribed by British intelligence and later incorporated into sniper training curricula across NATO forces. He never learned the names of the men who had haunted him, and he never asked. After repatriation in 1947, Wolf returned to his family's farm in Bavaria. He did not speak of the war except once, to his grandson, 60 years later, when age and illness had eroded his reluctance. The conversation was brief. What was the worst part of the war, Opa? The forest. Because so many died? No, because I survived. Corporal Mackenzie returned to Montana in 1946. He resumed guiding hunting expeditions, though clients noted he had become quieter, more withdrawn. He never fired his rifle again, even when elk stood within range. When asked why, he would say only, "I'm done with killing things that don't understand why they're dying." He passed away in 1989, and his obituary made no mention of the war beyond veteran of European theatre. Private Hartley became a high school mathematics teacher in Burlington, Vermont. He taught for 37 years, known for his patience and his habit of pausing mid-lecture to stare out the classroom window at the tree line beyond the soccer field. In 1983, a student asked if he had killed anyone during the war. Hartley did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his response was measured. "War asks you to solve problems that shouldn't exist. I solved mine. That's all anyone needs to know." The Hurtgen forest was cleared of bodies over the course of 18 months. Many were never recovered. The forest reclaimed them, bone and uniform dissolving into soil, names lost to root systems and erosion. By 1950, the area had been replanted with young pines, and by 1970, no visible evidence remained of the November siege. Hikers now walk trails where 800 men learned the difference between fear and terror. In military academies from West Point to Sandhurst, the engagement is studied under the designation Hurtgen Containment, Case Study in Psychological Force Multiplication. Students analyze Mackenzie's shot selection, Hartley's patience, the tactical use of environmental factors. The lesson distilled into doctrine: overwhelming force can be neutralized by precision, discipline, and the weaponization of uncertainty. But the lesson Wolf carried until his death was different, simpler, and more terrible. In war, the greatest weapon is not the one that kills the most, but the one that makes death feel inevitable. Two men with two rifles had transformed 800 soldiers into ghosts long before their bodies stopped breathing. They had not fought a battalion. They had erased it. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of the 326th Grenadier Division. We'll see you in the next video.